You have exactly 30 days to clear your things out of my house, Arthur. Lauren did not even lower her voice. We were still sitting in the attorney's conference room, and my wife had only been in the ground for a few hours. The heavy leather chair squeaked as Lauren shifted her weight. The small room smelled like stale coffee, and the cloying, sweet scent of the funeral lilies that still clung to my wool suit. Pressing my palms flat against the mahogany table, I noticed how freezing cold the wood felt under my skin. Looking across the table, I waited for David, the estate attorney, to intervene. The man refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to adjust his silver tie. "Lauren is correct," David said, his voice dropping to that practiced, careful tone lawyers use when they know they are about to ruin your life. The residence was transferred into Evelyn's living trust 6 months ago, and as the designated successor beneficiary, Lauren now holds full control of the property. My chest tightened, making it hard to draw a breath. At 70 years old, after spending 40 years working as a structural engineer to make sure things would never collapse, I was watching the foundation of my own life give way. "Evelyn and I bought that house together," I said. The words sounded thin, hollowed out by the last 3 days of grief. "We lived there for 35 years. Lauren let out a sharp, clicking sigh and tapped her acrylic nails against her designer handbag. "And you signed the spousal waiver last October. You agreed to this. You stood right there in the kitchen and signed it." The memory of that afternoon rushed back to me. Lauren had brought a notary to the house while Evelyn was sleeping, smiling and touching my arm as she promised the waiver was just a tax formality to protect Evelyn's medical care. She swore I would live in that house until the day I died. Like an absolute fool, I had believed her. Trusting the woman my son chose to marry was the biggest mistake of my life. David cleared his throat and slid a small, padded envelope across the table toward me. "Evelyn asked me to give you this privately, but since we are all here and the trust administration is concluded, I believe it belongs to you now." The envelope weighed almost nothing. "What is that?" Lauren demanded, her neck craned forward to get a better look at the package. "Personal effects," David replied smoothly. "Evelyn delivered it to my office 3 weeks before she passed." Tearing the paper open revealed a standard, clear plastic cassette tape sliding into my palm. It looked old, exactly like the kind of tapes we used to play in the car back in the 90s. A piece of white masking tape was stuck to the front, and Evelyn's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable, spelled out my name. Lauren let out a dry laugh. "A tape? She left you a piece of plastic while she left me a $2 million estate. Pack your bags, old man, because I want to stage the living room by the 1st of the month." Standing up, she grabbed her coat and walked out without looking back. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, rattling the glass of water on David's desk. The drive home was quiet and empty. When I unlocked the front door, the house felt painfully still, and the medical equipment was still sitting in the living room. The oxygen concentrator sat silent in the corner. Out in the garage, a search through my old workbench uncovered a battery-operated radio. My hands trembled as I blew the dust off the tape deck. Sliding Evelyn's cassette inside, my thumb pressed down on the stiff plastic play button. The tape hissed. Static crackled through the small speaker, followed by the sound of heavy, labored breathing. Then, my wife's voice cut through the noise. She stopped my oxygen. The tape clicked and went dead. The tape clicked and went dead. I sat in the dim light of my garage for a long time, staring at the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. My thumb hovered over the rewind button, but I could not bring myself to press it right away. The hissing static and that terrifying gasp for air echoed in my ears. I needed to hear it again, yet I knew the cheap speaker on my old radio was masking half the sound. I grabbed my car keys and drove to a small electronics repair shop on 4th Street. The bell above the door chimed, announcing my arrival to a narrow room packed with vintage receivers and tangled cables. The owner was a young guy named Marcus, who had fixed my turntable 3 years ago. I set the cassette on the glass counter, and my voice stayed completely steady when I asked him to clean up the audio and put it on a digital drive. Marcus looked at the handwritten label, then back at me. Without asking any questions, the young man plugged the plastic tape into a heavy steel deck connected to his computer and slipped on a pair of headphones. 10 minutes later, he handed me a small silver flash drive. "I isolated the vocal track," Marcus said, keeping his eyes on his keyboard. Lowered the tape hiss. "There is some background noise in the room when she recorded it, but her voice is as clear as it is going to get." I paid him $40 in cash and walked out to my car. Plugging the drive into the dashboard port, I stared through the windshield at the brick wall of the alley and pressed play. Evelyn sounded closer this time. The terrifying rasp in her throat filled the cabin of my sedan, but Marcus was right about the background noise. Beneath my wife's voice, there was a steady, rhythmic humming, and then a distinct click. I did not know what the sound meant yet, but I knew who to ask about Evelyn's final afternoon. Brenda had been Evelyn's primary hospice nurse for 2 months. She agreed to meet me at a diner near the edge of town, far enough away from my neighborhood that we would not run into anyone from the country club. When I slid into the vinyl booth across from her, she offered a sad, exhausted smile. Her green scrubs smelled faintly of hospital sanitizer and cheap vanilla perfume. "I am so sorry, Arthur," Brenda said, wrapping both hands around her coffee mug. "Your wife was a wonderful woman." I thanked her, skipping the small talk because my chest felt tight, and asked her to walk me through her final shift at our house. Brenda frowned and looked down at her coffee. "That was the strange part," Brenda explained slowly. "Lauren sent me home at 3 o'clock that afternoon, claiming she wanted to have some private family time with Evelyn. She promised to handle the evening medication rotation herself." My jaw tightened. Evelyn required a strict schedule for her pain management, and Lauren had zero medical training. I asked the nurse if my son's wife had documented anything in the physical nursing logbook we kept on the kitchen counter. Brenda shook her head, and her brow furrowed in confusion. When I came back the next morning after Evelyn passed, the logbook was gone. I asked Lauren about it. She claimed she threw it away because seeing it was too painful. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A missing logbook meant a gap in the medication records, and a gap meant no one could prove exactly what time my wife's condition changed. Lauren was entirely in control of the timeline. I thanked Brenda, left a $20 bill on the table, and drove back to the house I no longer owned. Pulling into the driveway, I found Lauren standing on the front lawn. She wore a perfectly pressed black dress, held a cup of tea, and was chatting with our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Higgins. I stepped out of my car, and the two women stopped talking. "Arthur," Lauren said. Her voice carried a thick, sugary coating of fake sympathy. "I was just telling Margaret how worried we all are about you." Mrs. Higgins looked at me with pity in her eyes. "It takes time to process a loss like this, Arthur. You should rest." "I am fine, Margaret," I said, keeping my tone carefully polite. Lauren took a step closer to me and sighed heavily. "He is just terribly confused. The grief is making him imagine things. He even thinks someone messed with Evelyn's care." The woman looked back at Margaret and tapped her temple. "The mind plays cruel tricks on us when we are mourning. My husband and I are just trying to get him the professional help he needs." My hands curled into fists inside my jacket pockets. Lauren was building a narrative. She was planting the idea that I was a delusional, grieving old man so that if I ever tried to speak up, the entire community would pity me instead of believing me. I did not argue with her. I just nodded at Margaret, walked past Lauren, and went straight into my study. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The room felt suffocating, but I needed to focus. Sitting down at my oak desk, I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, pulled up the audio file, and put on a pair of noise-canceling headphones. I played the clean track again and closed my eyes. I ignored the hissing. I ignored the heartbreaking sound of my wife struggling to breathe. I focused entirely on the background noise in the seconds before Evelyn spoke. The steady humming was the oxygen concentrator motor running in the corner of the bedroom. Then came the click. It was not the sound of someone tripping over a cord, and it was not a physical switch being flipped on the machine itself. After 40 years of engineering, my brain recognized the acoustic signature of electrical hardware. It was a sharp, heavy, mechanical snap. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark screen of my laptop. The oxygen concentrator had not simply failed. The power to the wall outlet had been cut. The noise on the tape was the unmistakable sound of a high-voltage smart power relay engaging, the exact kind of remote plug you control from an application on your phone. The mechanical snap from the audio file echoed in my mind all night. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the California sun was already baking the asphalt, and I was standing at the front counter of Apex Medical Supply. The small storefront smelled intensely of rubbing alcohol and fresh cardboard. A young man wearing a blue polo shirt stood behind the register, tapping his keyboard to pull up my account. "We picked up the oxygen concentrator yesterday, Arthur," the technician said, looking over the rim of his glasses. Everything was in perfect working order. Leaning against the laminate counter, I kept my voice completely flat and told him I needed the diagnostic printout for the insurance company. My hands stayed buried deep inside my jacket pockets so the young man would not see my fingers trembling. The printer in the back room whirred to life, and a moment later, he handed me a single sheet of paper. Scanning the columns of timestamps, my eyes locked onto the final entry. The machine had not malfunctioned. At exactly 3:15 on the afternoon Evelyn died, the data log recorded a sudden, total loss of external power. The unit had an internal backup battery designed to sound a loud alarm, but someone had physically flipped the emergency toggle switch to the off position. Walking back to my car, I pulled out my phone and loaded the electric company portal. The house had a smart meter installed 3 years ago, tracking power usage hour by hour. The digital graph for that Tuesday afternoon showed a perfectly steady draw. There were no dips, no surges, and no neighborhood grid failures. The street had not lost power. Only the wall outlet in Evelyn's bedroom had gone completely dead. Knowing how my daughter-in-law stopped the machine was only half the puzzle. Evelyn had been given 6 months to live by her primary oncologist, and I could not understand why anyone would take such an enormous risk just to accelerate the clock. Greed alone did not make sense. Pulling into my neighborhood an hour later, a white sedan parked directly in front of my house caught my attention. A man in a tailored gray suit stood on the front lawn, holding a clipboard and pressing a laser measuring tool against the brick exterior. Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor from yesterday, was watering her hydrangeas next door and watching him intently. "Arthur," Margaret called out, dropping her green garden hose on the grass. "I thought Lauren said you were resting at a hotel for the rest of the week." I stopped at the edge of the property line and asked her who the man in the suit was. Margaret leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried over the sound of the running water. "He is an appraiser from First National Bank. Lauren told me they are just updating the homeowner policy, but my nephew works in real estate. You only get an appraisal like that when you are taking out a massive new loan." The pieces began sliding into a terrifying alignment. I walked up my own driveway, bypassed the front door, and used my old brass key to unlock the side gate leading to the patio. The kitchen window was cracked open, letting a warm breeze carry the sound of Lauren's voice out into the yard. She was pacing across the kitchen tiles, speaking frantically into her phone. "I understand the timeline, Richard, but the trust administration is officially complete. David filed the transfer documents yesterday morning. The deed is completely in my name now. You have to tell the underwriters to approve the cash-out refinance by Friday, or the commercial lenders are going to seize everything." A heavy, suffocating weight settled over my chest. I backed away from the window, sat down at the cast-iron patio table, and opened the web browser on my phone. The state business registry is public information, and my thumb hovered over the screen before typing in the name of the luxury eldercare startup my son and Lauren had launched 2 years ago. The search results loaded, and the truth hit me much harder than the initial grief. It was not a thriving enterprise. According to the public court filings, the company had been hit with 4 separate civil lawsuits for unpaid vendor invoices over the last 5 months. They were drowning. Scrolling further down the page, I found a notice of default filed by a major commercial lender just 60 days ago. The startup was nearly $1 million in debt, and the bank was preparing to liquidate their assets. My son and his wife were broke. Their business was collapsing, and they desperately needed a massive infusion of cash to keep their creditors at bay. But a bank will not let you borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars against a house unless you possess a clean, uncontested title. That explained the hurried trust administration meeting immediately after the funeral. Lauren needed David, the estate attorney, to formalize the transfer of the property out of Evelyn's living trust and directly into her name as the successor beneficiary. She had pushed the legal paperwork through with terrifying speed, ignoring every standard grieving protocol. Now, with the deed solely in her possession, she was leveraging my home to save her sinking company. She intended to weaken her, make her appear increasingly incapable, and accelerate the guardianship process. But when she deliberately interrupted the oxygen supply, she crossed a line she could never uncross. Panic turned neglect into a cover-up. She did it out of sheer, unadulterated panic. The commercial bank was threatening to destroy her lifestyle, and Evelyn's prolonged illness was taking entirely too long. My wife had simply been a roadblock between a desperate, failing business owner and the collateral she needed to survive. I sat on the patio for another hour, watching the appraiser pack his equipment into the trunk of his sedan and drive away. The house was about to become the financial anchor for their fraudulent company. But a luxury eldercare business relies entirely on public trust and community reputation, and it was time to see exactly what kind of professional history my daughter-in-law was trying so desperately to protect. The local country club hosted their summer charity auction just 2 nights after I discovered the truth about the business. Stepping into the grand ballroom, the stifling humidity of the California evening gave way to aggressive air conditioning and the overwhelming scent of roasted prime rib. A string quartet played softly in the corner, almost completely drowned out by the clinking of heavy silverware and the chatter of wealthy donors. Lauren stood at the center of the room, wearing a tasteful navy dress and holding a crystal water glass. The woman worked the crowd like a seasoned politician, graciously accepting condolences about Evelyn while simultaneously handing out glossy brochures for her elder care startup. Watching her play the role of the devoted, grieving daughter-in-law made my stomach turn, and my jaw ached from clenching my teeth. I walked across the patterned carpet and stopped directly behind her. My son, Michael, was standing dutifully at his wife's side. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a suit that seemed slightly too large for his frame. "Arthur," Lauren said, placing a manicured hand over her heart as she turned around. "I am so surprised you came. You really should be at home resting. The grief is just taking such a terrible toll on your mind." A few older women nearby turned to look at me, their faces softening with pity. Lauren was doing it again. She was laying the groundwork, ensuring that every prominent member of our community viewed me as a confused, deteriorating old man. I ignored her completely and looked at my son. "We need to talk about the mortgage on the house, Michael." Michael immediately broke eye contact and stared down at his polished leather shoes. His shoulders stiffened, and he stepped slightly in front of his wife, a defensive posture that told me everything I needed to know. "Not here, Dad," Michael whispered, keeping his voice low so the surrounding guests could not hear. "Lauren has been working so hard to keep the company afloat this week. She is dealing with a lot of stress, and you need to stop looking at her like she is the enemy." "I am looking at her like a woman who just took sole possession of my home to pay off a commercial lender," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly even. "She did not take anything," Michael snapped, finally looking up. His voice cracked with a mixture of anger and desperation. "Mom wanted her to have the property to protect our legacy. You are just confused about the timeline." He actually believed her. Or worse, he was so terrified of the crushing business debt that he was willing to blindly accept whatever lies his wife fed him. There was no point in arguing with a man who was fighting to keep his eyes closed. I nodded slowly, turned my back on them, and walked out of the ballroom. I did not need my son to believe me yet. I needed someone on the inside of that failing company, and the public court filings I discovered yesterday gave me a perfect target. A specific name had appeared on multiple vendor complaints as the primary point of contact before the lawsuits began. Her name was Chloe Vance, and she had been the lead operations manager for the startup before abruptly quitting 3 months ago. Finding her took most of the next morning. Chloe was now working at an independent floral shop, 2 towns over, far away from Lauren's sphere of influence. The air inside the shop smelled sharply of cut stems and damp earth. Chloe was standing behind a stainless steel counter, arranging white roses. She was a young woman in her late 20s, but when I walked through the door and introduced myself, her hands began to tremble. She dropped her pruning shears on the counter, and the heavy metal clattered loudly against the wood. "I cannot talk to you about Lauren or the company," Chloe whispered, glancing nervously toward the back storage room. "I signed a strict non-disclosure agreement when I left. Her corporate lawyers will absolutely destroy me." "A non-disclosure agreement does not cover fraud," I said softly, resting my hands on the cold steel counter. "My wife is dead, Chloe. Lauren is using my home as collateral to save a business that is already completely bankrupt. I just need to know how she is hiding the financial shortfall." Chloe closed her eyes and took a deep, shaky breath. When she looked back at me, her face was pale, with a mixture of fear and deep regret. "The commercial bankruptcy is only half the problem, Arthur." Chloe leaned across the counter, dropping her voice to a barely audible whisper. "Did you really think your wife was the first person Lauren isolated from their family?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I stood perfectly still, waiting for her to continue. Chloe explained the pattern. The luxury elder care business was supposed to provide elite home nursing, but Lauren used it as a hunting ground. She would find wealthy clients experiencing cognitive decline, slowly cut off their daily communication with distant relatives, and convince the confused seniors to invest heavily in the startup as silent partners. When the investment money inevitably vanished into the company debt, Lauren simply blamed market conditions and poor administrative tracking. "I realized what she was doing in April," Chloe said, wiping her wet hands on her canvas apron. "I tried to print the internal client emails so I could report her to the state medical board. But Lauren caught me at the printer. She fired me that exact afternoon, threatened to sue me for corporate espionage, and wiped the entire local server network clean to destroy the evidence." I felt a crushing weight settle on my chest. If Lauren had wiped the company's servers 3 months ago, the digital paper trail proving her history of fraud was completely gone. Without that baseline pattern of manipulation, Exposing what she did to Evelyn would be infinitely harder. But Chloe offered a small, bitter smile and reached under the counter to grab a blank receipt pad. Lauren understands psychological manipulation perfectly, the young woman said, scribbling a web address on the paper with a blue pen. But she does not understand enterprise information technology. She only deleted the physical hard drives sitting in the office. Chloe slid the piece of paper across the glass counter. It contained a secure web link and a long string of letters and numbers. When I set up the corporate network last year, I enabled an automated off-site cloud backup system for disaster recovery, Chloe explained. Lauren never knew the service existed, so she never changed my administrative password. I looked down at the slip of paper in my hand. Lauren thought she had successfully burned her history to the ground, but she was wrong. The entire record of her corporate fraud, her internal emails, and potentially the exact digital logs of her movements the week Evelyn died were sitting perfectly preserved on a remote server, just waiting for me to log in. I parked my sedan outside a corporate technology consulting firm on Oak Street early the next morning. My wallet was lighter by $300, but the young network specialist sitting next to me was worth every penny. His name was Tyler, and he smelled strongly of peppermint chewing gum and dark espresso. The small office was cold, filled with the constant, steady hum of computer cooling fans. Tyler typed the web address Chloe had provided into his laptop, hit the enter key, and a gray login prompt appeared on the screen. My chest tightened as he carefully entered the long string of characters. The screen froze for 5 agonizing seconds before a massive directory of corporate folders populated the display. Chloe was right. The automated backup system had quietly saved everything Lauren thought she had destroyed. "What exactly are we looking for, Arthur?" Tyler asked, clicking through the complex administrative menus. I pulled up a chair next to him and told the technician to isolate the smart home device history for the Tuesday my wife passed away. Tyler opened a system log file, and endless rows of green text began scrolling past our eyes. The young man used a search function to filter the overwhelming amount of data, narrowing the results down to the specific smart plug located in the master bedroom of my house. "Here it is," Tyler said, pointing a pale finger at a specific line of code. Power was severed at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. "Was it a scheduled automated timer?" I asked, leaning closer to the glowing monitor. Tyler shook his head and highlighted the text with his cursor. "No, this code indicates a manual command. Someone opened the mobile application on their phone and pressed the digital off button." That single line of text confirmed the terrifying mechanical click I heard on the cassette tape. Lauren had stood in that bedroom, pulled out her cell phone, and deliberately cut the electricity to the oxygen machine. But I needed absolute proof that my daughter-in-law was the person holding that device. I asked Tyler if the backup server stored the wireless router history for the property. He nodded, typing another rapid sequence of commands to access the local network connection logs. Every modern cell phone has a unique identification address, and Lauren always kept her device connected to our home internet to avoid cellular data charges. Tyler cross-referenced the timestamp. At exactly 3:15, Lauren's specific phone was actively communicating with the network. She was inside the house, logged into the system, sending the kill command. I thanked the young man, asked him to copy all the log files onto my encrypted hard drive, and drove straight back to the house. Walking through the quiet hallway, the afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. The air felt heavy and suffocating. I went directly into Evelyn's old bedroom, opened the top drawer of her oak nightstand, and pulled out her tablet. My wife had worn a digital smartwatch every single day to track her vital signs for the cardiologist. The physical watch was gone, likely packed away by Lauren into a donation box, but the health data automatically synced to the tablet through a wireless connection. The glass screen felt cold against my palm as the device powered on. Opening the primary health application, I navigated to the heart rate records for that terrible Tuesday. The visual graph was a jagged red line representing her pulse. The medical data remained perfectly steady throughout the early afternoon, beating at a frail but consistent 80 beats per minute. Then, at exactly 3:15, the red line began to drop. The plunge was steep and violent, documenting a frantic, terrifying struggle for oxygen in a room where no one would help her. At 3:17, the jagged red line flattened into complete nothingness. The timeline was no longer a wild theory. The audio tape, the smart plug log, the router connection, and the biological data all locked together in a flawless, horrifying sequence. Just as I set the tablet down on the mattress, my cell phone vibrated violently in my pocket. The caller identification displayed Lauren's name. I pressed the answer button and brought the receiver to my ear without saying a single word. Someone just accessed our old cloud backup using a retired administrator credential, Lauren said evenly. The security system sent me an alert. I don't know whether it was you, an old employee, or someone trying to hack us. But if you're involved, stop digging through company records that don't belong to you. Did you? I replied, keeping my own voice perfectly flat. You need to stop this, my daughter-in-law warned, letting a trace of genuine, panicked anger bleed into her words. You are trespassing in places you do not belong, and you are going to embarrass yourself in front of the entire community. Michael is already drafting the legal paperwork to have you evaluated for dementia. Do not push us. The line went dead before I could respond. She was scared, and her empty threat about a medical evaluation meant she was running out of conventional options to keep me quiet. I walked into the kitchen to pour a glass of water, trying to steady my racing pulse, when a loud, sharp knock at the front door echoed through the empty house. Looking through the glass side panel, I saw a delivery driver in a brown uniform walking back to his idling truck. Opening the heavy wooden door, I looked down at the welcome mat. A small, padded manila envelope was resting on the fabric. There was no return address, no postage stamp, and no shipping label of any kind. My name was simply written across the paper in thick black marker. Picking up the package, I carried it to the kitchen counter and tore the adhesive seal open. A single silver flash drive slid out onto the granite surface. I had absolutely no idea who sent it, but the war for my family had just escalated. The silver flash drive sat heavily in my palm. Plugging the small device into the side of my laptop, I waited for the file directory to load. Chloe had kept her word, and the automated backup system had captured everything. The screen filled with hundreds of internal company emails, sorted neatly by date and time. Outside the study window, tires crunched loudly against the gravel driveway. Lauren's white sedan jerked to a stop, and my son stepped out of the passenger side. They were already fighting. Even through the thick glass, Lauren's sharp, demanding voice cut through the afternoon air. She was waving a thick stack of bank documents, pointing aggressively at the front door. Michael kept shaking his head, rubbing the back of his neck like a man carrying an impossible burden. I turned back to the glowing monitor. Using the search function, I filtered the thousands of messages for the Tuesday Evelyn died. Most of the results were mundane, corporate newsletters and billing reminders. Then, a single automated message from our home network provider caught my eye. The subject line read, "Device offline notification." The system had generated an alert the exact second the smart plug in the master bedroom was deactivated. It was addressed directly to Lauren's primary inbox. But looking closely at the recipient list, a cold chill ran down my arms. The system had automatically sent a carbon copy to Michael's personal email address, because he was the one who originally configured the house wireless network. The heavy oak door to my study pushed open. My son stood in the frame, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. "Dad," Michael started, his voice exhausted and thin. "Lauren thinks it is time for us to look at assisted living facilities for you, just for a temporary evaluation to get your mind right." I did not argue. Instead, I stood up and rotated the laptop so the screen faced the doorway. Pointing at the monitor, I told him to read the highlighted message. My son let out a heavy sigh, stepped closer to the desk, and scanned the text. The color drained completely out of his face. His hands started to shake, fumbling in his jacket pocket to pull out his own cell phone. Michael frantically tapped the glass screen, scrolling deep into his archived messages. He was searching for something he desperately prayed he would not find. "It is here," Michael whispered, his voice cracking. I got this exact email alert at 3:15 that afternoon. I swiped it away because I was in a meeting with the bankruptcy lawyers. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wide with a terrifying realization. "She turned the outlet off, Dad." She was standing in the room with Mom. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway before I could answer. Lauren marched into the kitchen, dropping her leather bag onto the granite island with a loud slap. Michael brushed past me, walking straight toward his wife. I followed closely behind, leaning against the doorframe to watch the foundation of their marriage begin to crack. "Why did you manually disconnect the smart plug in the bedroom on Tuesday, Lauren?" Michael asked. His tone lacked its usual passive, agreeable warmth. Lauren froze. The practiced, sympathetic smile vanished from her face, replaced instantly by a tight and defensive mask. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. The power must have flickered. Or maybe your mother kicked the cord while she was resting." "The system logs digital commands," Michael countered, holding his phone up so the screen faced her. "You open the application and press the off switch. The router recorded your specific phone sending the signal. Tell me the truth. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms and let out a harsh, patronizing laugh. You are letting him do this to you, Michael. Your father is sick. He is spinning these paranoid delusions because he cannot accept that Evelyn is gone. And now you are letting his dementia infect your own mind. We are under a massive amount of stress with the commercial bank, and I will not let him destroy our future. Michael stared at the woman he married. For the first time in 2 years, he was actually seeing her clearly. He slowly lowered his phone and took a deep breath, letting his shoulders slump in a perfect imitation of defeat. You are right, my son said softly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. I am just stressed about the refinance. Go wait in the car, Lauren. I will get Dad to sign the final property waiver and be right out. Lauren offered a triumphant, satisfied smile. She picked up her keys, adjusted her designer coat, and walked out the front door, leaving the heavy wood slightly ajar. The moment the latch clicked, Michael's entire demeanor shifted. He spun around, rushed back into my study, and pulled a small charging cable from his leather briefcase. Plugging his phone directly into my laptop, his fingers flew across the keyboard. He was dragging the entire folder of network logs and company emails onto his personal device. I need a copy of everything, Dad, Michael whispered, his eyes locked on the transfer progress bar. If I take these to the police right now, her corporate lawyers will bury us in injunctions. We have to let her sign the final real estate disclosures tomorrow, so she commits federal bank fraud on paper. The computer screen showed 90% complete, then 95%. I watched the green bar crawl across the window, holding my breath. Before the transfer could finish, the front door hinges squeaked loudly. Rapid footsteps moved down the hall, and Lauren stepped directly into the study. Her dark eyes swept over the room, dropping instantly to the white cable connecting my laptop to her husband's phone. Lauren stared at the white cable connecting my laptop to Michael's phone. Her dark eyes narrowed, shifting from the glowing computer monitor to her husband's pale face. The silence in the study felt thick enough to choke on. Michael did not panic. My son smoothly reached across the desk, unplugged the wire, and slipped his cell phone into his jacket pocket. He offered his wife a tired, grieving smile. I was just downloading the last of Mom's digital photos from the hard drive, Michael said, his voice perfectly steady. I want to get a memorial board printed for the foundation gathering next week. The tension in Lauren's shoulders slowly unwound. Her arrogance was always her greatest vulnerability, and she simply could not imagine a world where her passive husband would ever work against her. She let out an exasperated sigh, waving her hand dismissively toward the hallway. We do not have time for memorial crafts right now, Michael, the woman snapped, turning on her heel. The commercial bank rejected the cash-out refinance application this morning. They said our debt ratio was too high. I had to pivot, so I called a corporate real estate firm that specializes in expedited cash sales. Their property inspector is arriving in less than an hour, and this house needs to look absolutely flawless. Lauren walked away, completely unaware that she had just signed her own ruin. The next 48 hours transformed my home into a chaotic staging ground. Strangers in tailored suits marched across the hardwood floors, opening closets and measuring square footage. The corporate buyer was a private equity group looking for luxury suburban rentals, and they were willing to wire $1.5 million in cash to close the deal by the end of the week. I stayed completely out of their way. Sitting in my leather armchair by the fireplace, I watched my daughter-in-law orchestrate the sale with terrifying efficiency. The air in the house smelled constantly of chemical lemon polish and fresh vacuum exhaust. Lauren was erasing 35 years of Evelyn's life, scrubbing away every trace of our family, to make the property look like a blank, profitable slate. Friday afternoon brought the final trap. A mobile notary public arrived at 2 o'clock, carrying a thick leather briefcase. The man set up his stamping equipment on our granite kitchen island. Lauren stood at the counter, wearing a sharp white blouse, holding a gold fountain pen. She looked completely triumphant. I sat at the small breakfast table just a few feet away, nursing a cold cup of black coffee. My chest hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face entirely blank. These are the final seller disclosures and the affidavit of title, the notary explained, sliding a dense stack of legal documents across the marble surface. By signing these, you are swearing under penalty of perjury that you are the sole, uncontested legal owner of the property. You are also legally certifying that the transfer of the deed into your name involved no fraud, coercion, or elder abuse. The buyers require this affidavit before they authorize the wire transfer. Lauren did not even bother to read the fine print. She flashed a brilliant, practiced smile, uncapped her pen, and pressed the metal tip to the paper. The scratch of the ink against the thick parchment echoed loudly in the quiet kitchen. Lauren signed her name on the first page, flipped to the second, and signed again. She was voluntarily creating fresh, undeniable evidence of federal wire fraud. By officially lying on a financial disclosure document to secure a massive interstate wire transfer, my daughter-in-law had just escalated her crimes from a local tragedy to a major felony. The notary stamped the final page, pressing his heavy seal into the paper. "All finished, ma'am. I need to run out to my car for a moment to grab the buyer's addendum. I will be right back." The man walked out the front door, leaving the executed disclosure packet resting on the island. Lauren immediately turned around to check her reflection in the hallway mirror, admiring her own victory. I stood up from the breakfast table, pulled my cell phone from my pocket, and stepped silently up to the counter. My camera shutter clicked twice, capturing high-resolution images of her signature directly beneath the perjury warning clauses. I slipped the phone away and sat back down just as Lauren turned around. 10 minutes later, the notary left the house, and Lauren went upstairs to pack her designer clothes. Michael walked into the kitchen through the garage door. He looked at me, and I gave him a single, silent nod. My son pulled his car keys out of his pocket. He already had the silver flash drive loaded with the smart plug data, the deleted company emails, and the audio file of his mother's final moments. I forwarded the fresh photographs of the forged real estate disclosures directly to his phone. "I am going to the police precinct downtown," Michael whispered, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his keys. "Detective Miller is waiting for me." I told him I had a massive financial fraud case with a linked homicide, and he cleared his afternoon schedule. I watched my son walk out the door, carrying the full weight of our family's justice in his hands. The waiting game was sheer agony. The afternoon sun slowly dipped below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the empty living room. I sat in the darkness, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, wondering if the evidence chain was strong enough. The legal system was notoriously slow, and Lauren was scheduled to finalize the house sale at a closing ceremony the very next morning. If the police delayed their investigation, the money would clear, and she would disappear behind an army of expensive corporate defense attorneys. At exactly 8 o'clock that night, the screen of my cell phone lit up on the coffee table. The caller identification displayed an unknown local number. I answered the call and brought the speaker to my ear. "Arthur," Michael said. His voice sounded hollow, completely drained of emotion, but carried a hard edge of finality. "I just finished giving my formal statement to Detective Miller." He took the flash drive and the photographs straight to a county judge. I gripped the armrest of my chair, afraid to breathe. "And?" "The judge reviewed the digital timestamps and the signed disclosures," my son replied, taking a ragged breath. "He signed the search and arrest warrants 10 minutes ago. They are coming for her tomorrow morning." Saturday morning arrived with a suffocating, heavy heat that settled over the California suburbs. I stood by the bay window in the living room, watching a pristine black town car pull into the driveway at exactly 9 o'clock. 3 men stepped out of the vehicle. The corporate buyer, a tall man wearing a sharp Italian suit, walked alongside the estate attorney, David, and a representative from the title company. They carried themselves with the relaxed, confident posture of men, about to complete a highly profitable transaction. Lauren opened the front door to greet them, wearing a stunning white dress and a perfectly calibrated smile that promised cooperation and absolute legal compliance. I stayed completely out of sight. Standing quietly in the shadow of the hallway, I watched them settle around the dining room table. The air smelled of freshly brewed espresso and the expensive leather of the buyer's briefcase. "Everything is in perfect order, Lauren," David said, his voice dropping into its familiar, soothing cadence. The attorney slid a final stack of printed documents across the polished mahogany table. "We have the signed disclosures from yesterday, the clear property title, and the transfer authorization. The funds are currently sitting in escrow, and the moment you sign this final receipt, the wire will be released into your corporate business account." Lauren picked up the gold fountain pen. Her manicured fingers did not tremble, and she did not hesitate. The woman who had suffocated my wife for a real estate transaction pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name with a sweeping, elegant flourish. "Congratulations," the buyer said, reaching across the table to shake her hand. "The house is officially ours." "Thank you," Lauren replied smoothly. "Evelyn would have been so happy to know her legacy is securing our family's future." The sound of heavy, rapid footsteps crushing the gravel outside shattered the polite silence of the room. Through the front window, I saw 3 unmarked dark sedans block the end of the driveway, boxing in the buyer's town car. 6 plainclothes officers, wearing dark windbreakers with gold badges clipped to their belts, moved quickly up the concrete walkway. Detective Miller did not bother knocking. The front door was still unlocked, and he pushed it open with enough force to rattle the hinges. "Lauren Hastings," Miller said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any theatrical emotion. The detective stepped into the dining room, holding a thick manila folder in his left hand. Two uniformed officers followed closely behind him, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. Lauren froze. The gold pen slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly against the mahogany table. "Excuse me," David interjected, jumping up from his chair. The attorney puffed out his chest, attempting to project legal authority. "This is a private, closed transaction. Do you have a warrant to enter this property?" Miller ignored the lawyer completely. The detective walked straight toward the head of the table and dropped the folder onto the documents Lauren had just signed. "We executed the primary search warrant on your corporate offices an hour ago," Miller explained, keeping his eyes locked on my daughter-in-law. "Your servers were wiped, but your IT administrator left the cloud backups fully active. We recovered every deleted email, every falsified investor statement, and the complete smart home device history from this residence." The color drained entirely from Lauren's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked wildly toward the front door, searching for an exit, but a third officer was already blocking the threshold. "We also have a sworn affidavit from your husband," Miller continued, his voice perfectly steady. "He provided the automated network alerts proving you manually deactivated Evelyn's medical equipment. We have the digital router logs, proving your specific cell phone was connected to the local network when the command was sent. We have the time-stamped biometric data showing the exact moment her heart stopped." The corporate buyer slowly backed away from the table, raising both of his hands as if to physically distance himself from the toxic transaction. "Those logs are circumstantial," Lauren finally managed to say. Her voice was a thin, high-pitched whisper, completely stripped of its usual commanding presence. "Anyone could have touched my phone. The power in this neighborhood is terrible, and the machine was old." "The logs gave us probable cause," Miller corrected, tapping the manila folder. "But the signed federal real estate disclosures you executed yesterday gave us the immediate felony. You swore under penalty of perjury that you acquired this property without fraud or elder abuse. You used a falsified legal document to solicit an interstate wire transfer from a commercial buyer. That is federal bank fraud, Mrs. Hastings, and we do not need a confession for that." I finally stepped out of the shadows. Walking slowly into the dining room, I kept my hands at my sides and looked directly into Lauren's eyes. The arrogant, triumphant mask she had worn for years was gone. In its place was nothing but raw, animal panic. "My son is waiting for you at the precinct," I told her quietly. "He gave them everything, Lauren. You do not have a legacy to protect anymore." Detective Miller nodded to the uniformed officers. They stepped forward, each taking one of Lauren's arms, and pulled her away from the table. There was no dramatic struggle, and she did not scream or fight. The sudden, overwhelming weight of the evidence seemed to completely crush her. The cold metal handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, echoing loudly in the silent room. David stood completely frozen, staring at the unsigned wire transfer authorization. The attorney realized, in a single, terrifying moment, that he had personally facilitated the fraudulent transfer of the trust, and his own legal career was likely over. The corporate buyer simply packed up his briefcase and walked out the door without saying a single word. The officers led Lauren out of the house, down the concrete walkway, and pushed her into the back of an unmarked sedan. I stood in the doorway, watching the cars back out of the driveway and disappear down the suburban street. The suffocating heat of the morning suddenly felt a little lighter. The investigation was over, the arrest was made, and the massive financial debt was finally someone else's problem. Turning back toward the empty house, I walked slowly into the garage and sat down at my old wooden workbench. The battery-operated radio was exactly where I left it. Evelyn had used her final moments of breath to tell me who stopped her oxygen. But the cassette tape still had 3 more minutes of magnetic ribbon left on the spool, and it was time to hear the rest of my wife's final message. My thumb rested on the heavy plastic play button of the radio. The garage was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator through the drywall. Evelyn's voice had just confirmed the worst truth imaginable, and 3 more minutes of magnetic tape waited on the spool. I wanted to press down. I wanted to hear every single word my wife had left for me. Instead, I popped the cassette out of the deck and slid it into my breast pocket. The metal spring clicked sharply. Lauren was sitting in a holding cell downtown, but an arrest was not a conviction. Until the woman who murdered my wife stood in front of a judge and lost everything, I had not earned the right to hear the rest of Evelyn's message. The next 9 months dissolved into a blur of sterile courtrooms and expensive legal consultations. Autumn stripped the leaves from the California oaks, giving way to a wet, bitter winter. The county prosecutor, a sharp woman with tired eyes and a relentless questioning style, built an absolute fortress of evidence. I spent most of my days sitting on uncomfortable wooden benches that smelled of cheap lemon polish and old floor wax. Across the aisle, Lauren's high-priced defense attorneys tried everything to dismantle the timeline. The men in tailored suits argued the electrical relay failure was a tragic coincidence. They claimed the router connection logs were purely circumstantial, suggesting the network was unstable. The prosecution played the restored audio file on the fourth day of the trial. Evelyn's final, struggling gasp for air filled the cavernous room, followed by that sharp, mechanical click of the smart plug. I kept my eyes focused on the wooden railing in front of me, but the sheer silence of the jury box told me everything. 12 strangers heard the exact moment a life was traded for real estate. The defense armor cracked completely in late January. Michael took the witness stand on a rainy Tuesday morning. My son looked hollowed out, wearing a dark suit that hung loosely on his shoulders. He refused to look at the defense table. When the prosecutor asked him to identify the internal network alert, Michael read the text aloud, and his voice echoed against the high plaster ceiling. He testified that Lauren had been the only person in the master bedroom, and he confirmed his wife had intentionally wiped the company hard drives to hide her financial insolvency. Then came the real estate documents. The prosecution projected the high-resolution photographs I had taken of the forged seller disclosures onto a massive screen. Lauren had signed a federal legal document swearing she had committed no fraud, doing so while the corporate buyer's money waited in escrow. The jury did not even need a full day to deliberate. Listening to the foreman read the verdict unraveled the tight, aching knot that had lived in my chest for almost a year. Guilty of elder abuse, resulting in death. Guilty of evidence tampering. Guilty of felony wire fraud. Lauren sat perfectly rigid at the defense table. She did not cry, and she refused to look back at the gallery. The bailiff stepped forward, instructing the prisoner to stand, and the sound of the metal chains securing her wrists felt like a heavy steel door, finally slamming shut. Her life evaporated over the following 60 days. Michael finalized the divorce proceedings in a quiet civil courthouse 2 towns over. My son packed his remaining clothes into a pair of canvas duffel bags and moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city. He did not ask for a single penny from the failed elder care business. He simply signed the dissolution papers and let the commercial lenders completely dismantle the fraudulent company, selling off every desk and computer to satisfy the massive, outstanding debts. The wealthy community that had once attended Lauren's lavish charity auctions completely erased her name from their social registers. The final loose thread was the living trust. Because my former daughter-in-law was convicted of elder abuse and fraud in relation to the property owner, the state statutes automatically invalidated her position as the successor beneficiary. David, the estate attorney who had been so eager to evict me after the funeral, was now facing a severe disciplinary review by the State Bar Association. A new, court-appointed trustee called me into a quiet office on the 3rd floor of the municipal building to discuss the property. The residence officially reverts to Evelyn's estate, Arthur, the older magistrate explained, sliding a fresh property deed across his massive oak desk. Since you are the surviving spouse, and the original spousal waiver was obtained through documented fraud, the house belongs entirely to you. You can move back in tomorrow morning. I looked down at the heavy parchment. The address printed in thick black ink had been my home for 35 years, yet the thought of sleeping in those empty rooms made my stomach turn. Lauren had assumed everyone was driven by the exact same blind greed that fueled her own life. She assumed I fought this brutal war to reclaim a piece of luxury real estate. No, I told the magistrate, pushing the legal document back across the polished wood. I do not want it. The man blinked, lowering his reading glasses. I am sorry, I do not understand. The property is worth over $2 million, Arthur. Sell it, I instructed, my voice completely steady. Put the house on the open market. Liquidate the asset and hold the cash in a secure escrow account. I will not live in a tomb. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked out of the building. The spring air tasted sharp and clean. The legal battles were finally finished. Lauren was locked away, the house was gone, and justice had been served cold and exact. There was only one thing left to do. Reaching into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushed against the smooth plastic of Evelyn's cassette tape. The escrow company handled the sale of the house with surprising speed. 3 weeks after I instructed the court-appointed trustee to liquidate the property, a different corporate buyer finalized the purchase. I never met them, and I never walked back through the front doors of that sprawling suburban estate. The money, a little over $2 million, was deposited securely into a new trust account bearing Evelyn's name. Michael called me on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year to the day since his mother passed. He asked if I wanted to accompany him to the bank to finalize the charitable foundation paperwork. My son had spent the last 12 months quietly rebuilding his life, working as a mid-level manager at a logistics firm and living in a modest apartment. He looked healthier, the dark circles under his eyes completely faded, and the heavy burden of his former marriage was finally lifted from his shoulders. I met him in the polished lobby of the regional bank branch. A young wealth manager guided us into a glass-walled conference room, sliding a stack of crisp legal documents across the table. "The Evelyn Hastings Memorial Foundation is fully incorporated, gentlemen," the banker said, pointing to the bottom signature line. "The primary charter dictates that all $2 million will be held in a high-yield index fund, and the annual interest will be distributed exclusively as grants to independent elder care oversight agencies." Michael picked up the pen first. He signed his name with a steady hand, formally renouncing any future claim to the fortune his ex-wife had killed for. He passed the pen to me, and I added my signature right below his. Walking out of the bank, the late spring air felt warm and alive. The California sun was bright, cutting through the morning haze. Michael stopped near my sedan, jingling his car keys in his pocket. "I'm going to visit the cemetery, Dad," Michael said quietly, looking down at the pavement. "I know you usually go on Sundays, but I thought maybe we could drive over there together today." I placed a hand on his shoulder and gave it a firm squeeze. "I will meet you there, Michael. I just need a few minutes alone in the car first." He nodded, understanding completely, and walked toward his own vehicle. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, shut the heavy door, and enjoyed the complete silence of the cabin. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the old plastic cassette tape. It felt lighter now, as if the suffocating weight of the last year had somehow drained out of the magnetic ribbon. The entire investigation was finished. Lauren was serving a 20-year sentence in a state penitentiary. The massive financial debt was wiped clean, and the house was sold. The foundation was established. I had done exactly what my wife needed me to do. Pressing the cassette into the dashboard deck, I hit the fast-forward button, skipping past the hissing static and that terrible, mechanical snap of the smart plug. I stopped the tape right after Evelyn gasped her final 4 words. My thumb hovered over the play button. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I pressed it down. The tape hissed again. For 10 long seconds, there was nothing but the sound of an empty room. I thought the recording was finished. But then, a faint rustling noise came through the speakers, followed by the distinctive sound of Evelyn adjusting her oxygen mask. "She thinks she is so clever, Arthur," Evelyn said. Her voice was incredibly weak, trembling with exhaustion, but it carried that familiar, stubborn spark of dry amusement she always had. "She thinks I am just a confused old woman, but I see exactly who she is." I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes as her voice filled the car. "I know she is going to take the house," Evelyn continued, stopping to take a slow, rattling breath. "She forced you to sign that waiver, and she pushed the trust documents in front of me when I was too tired to fight. She is going to try to take everything we built, but I am leaving this tape for you, Arthur, because I know you." A single tear slipped down my cheek, hot and fast. "I know you will not let her win," my wife whispered, her voice barely carrying over the static. "But promise me something, Arthur. Promise me you will not let that house destroy you, too. It is just wood and glass. It was never our real home. You were my home. Expose her, take the power away from her, and then walk away. Do not keep the property. Do not let her greed become your anchor." The tape crackled, and Evelyn let out a soft, tired sigh. "I love you, my stubborn engineer. Go build something new." The magnetic ribbon clicked loudly, and the tape deck stopped spinning. I sat in the car for a long time, wiping my face with the back of my hand. The quiet hum of the engine felt steady and reassuring. Evelyn had known all along. She knew exactly what Lauren was planning, and she trusted me to unravel the fraud. More importantly, she trusted me to know when the fight was over. She did not want me to reclaim the house. She wanted me to reclaim my peace. Putting the car in drive, I pulled out of the parking lot and turned toward the cemetery. The road ahead was completely clear. When you spend decades building a life with someone, you pour your heart into the walls of your home. You measure your legacy in Sunday dinners, quiet mornings on the patio, and the shared comfort of knowing you have created a safe harbor for your family. But when a predator steps into that sanctuary, they do not see the memories. They only see collateral. The hardest lesson you can learn from Arthur and Evelyn is that true legacy cannot be bound by property lines or a deed of trust. We all want to believe the best in the people our children choose to love. We want to see the polite smiles and the charity work as genuine kindness, rather than a carefully constructed mask. But the tragic reality is that financial manipulation rarely looks like a masked robbery. It looks like a daughter-in-law offering to help with medication. It looks like hurried legal paperwork disguised as a favor. The stark warning here is to never let politeness overrule your intuition. When someone tries to isolate a vulnerable member of your family, or when the details of their care suddenly become shrouded in secrecy, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to be willing to cause a disruption because silence is exactly what predators rely on to thrive. Yet the most profound takeaway from this journey is not just about exposing the truth. It is about what you do after the truth is dragged into the light. When you are deeply wronged, the natural human instinct is to fight tooth and nail to reclaim exactly what was stolen from you. You want to hold on to the house, the money, or the status, just to prove that you won. But Evelyn understood something crucial about the nature of grief and healing. If Arthur had moved back into that sprawling suburban estate, he would have spent the rest of his life surrounded by the ghosts of greed and betrayal. He would have anchored his soul to the site of his deepest trauma. Sometimes, the ultimate victory is having the courage to walk away entirely. True justice is not about taking back the bricks and mortar that someone else tainted. It is about stripping the manipulator of their power and refusing to let their actions dictate your future. Arthur won because he chose his own peace over a $2 million property. He took the terrible thing that happened to his family and transformed it into a foundation that would protect others, ensuring the voice of his wife would continue to speak for those who could no longer defend themselves. Holding on to bitterness and fighting for physical possessions can often trap you in the very nightmare you are trying to escape. Letting go is not a surrender. It is the most powerful declaration of your own freedom. It takes immense strength to look at the battlefield of a shattered family and decide that your serenity is worth more than the prize everyone else is fighting over. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between fighting for what was rightfully yours and walking away to protect your own peace of mind? And how did you find the strength to finally let go?